Right, let's take you back to Pretoria, and that's where the ministers have just accentuated the regulations in terms of giving the content around exactly what these will mean in practice. And let's speak now to our senior reporter, Ziyanda Ngcobo, who's live for us there. Ziyanda, good morning to you. Some reassurances coming from the acting Eskom CEO, but also give us a little bit of information around the agricultural sector, because food security is of utmost importance, and we have seen just how badly affected some farming communities have been because of load shedding.
Well, many communities are affected by load shedding, whether you're talking about crime, agriculture, as well as health. And you'll know then that you would have heard the health minister speaking about the 213, facilities that are going to be exempt. And of those, there's still an odd 91 that also are yet to be exempt out of those 213. But to go to the remarks by the acting Eskom CEO, that's Caleb Kasim, basically saying that reassuring South Africans that because they're going to be, just because there'll be, an exemption of certain facilities, it doesn't necessarily mean then that, other areas will have more load shedding to accommodate these exemptions, emphasizing the fact that the first priority is to reject stage 6 load shedding and to actually reduce then, load shedding across the board. And to go back then to what you were asking about agriculture, the minister there, that's Minister Togo Didiza, also speaking about how they'll be alleviating those communities through getting some reallocations. Those reallocations we've been hearing about from the Treasury, not quite specific on the numbers in terms of the agriculture sector, but certainly interventions there. But I want to talk also as well about, Oli, the emergency procurement, which is amongst the issues that South Africans have been concerned about, saying that, the cooperative governance minister saying that the police minister, I should say, has been empowered by the regulations to direct then law enforcement to specific hotspots when there is load shedding. We know that this is not a reality, at least not for myself. I can't even speak for myself here. And so in practical terms, this is what the ministers say, this is what will happen. But again, one wonders whether or not the impact will be felt, given the timelines that, for instance, some ministers have given themselves, that load shedding will be over within 12 to 18 months.
You asked a question about whether load shedding has had a direct impact on people losing lives, and I suppose the reason for this question is what the Minister of Cocta, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, said right at the beginning, that the primary reason for these regulations coming into being is so that there is a prevention of loss of life. So talk to us about that. What did the Minister of Health, for example, had to say in response to that question?
A very vague answer, I must say, because, whilst they are able to perhaps quantify what happens in their actual facilities insofar as the number of deaths, and the Minister Joe Phaahla saying that actually whilst the load shedding has been ramped up, they haven't recorded any deaths directly linked then to the lack of energy or electricity generation at their facilities. However, my question was about those who rely on oxygen, for example, at home, etc. And he says, well, they haven't been able to record that, and that's also quite important, because you would need to know how many people have died as a direct impact or direct link, causal link to load shedding, those who use equipment from their homes for dialysis, etc. And he says they haven't received such reports. So it also tells you in terms of the data that is being collected for this particular disaster hasn't been adjusted in terms of the methodology or even in terms of how they collect it so as to accommodate this. Because if you are going to then gazette a state of disaster, then as they've been saying continuously, the ordinary handbook is pretty much either thrown out the window or adjusted for that need to and contextual basis as you deal with each situation.
Then, Ziyanda, the accounting officers, we know that there are going to be funds that are going to start flowing. Some of those funds were for certain programs that are now going to have to be reprioritized. And so South Africans are going to be wary of issues of corruption. What's the response from the ministers concerned about how South Africans are going to be told as to where or how these monies have been used?
So the Cooperative Governance Minister, Dr. Dlamini Zuma, basically said that unlike the COVID-19 pandemic, because I'd asked what lessons they'd learned from that rampant looting and corruption, which has been so well recorded, she says, unlike then, the real-time audits that were being done by the Auditor General's office were only brought into effect after reports of corruption and how monies were being redirected and the abuse, essentially, of the emergency procurement process. She says now that is going to be done up front. The Auditor General's, teams are going to be all over, and every month then the accounting officials are going to have to go to Parliament to actually explain how the money has been spent, and she says she's hoping and she anticipates that this will be part of the mechanisms to ensure that there's accountability, but also act as a deterrent against those who would want to loot, the already stretched state coffers, Koli.
Final question. The regulations have been now promulgated. Talk to us about how often we are going to be briefed by the ministers. We saw during COVID, every now and then, the country would be briefed about where we are in terms of the state of disaster. The minister, in fact, concerned, reminding us that the state of disaster lapses after every 3 months, and if there's a need to renew, then it is renewed. But how often are these briefings going to be?
I think, Koli, you've also forgotten that one of the things that was said was that there's going to be a minister of what? Electricity. That minister of electricity is largely going to be in charge of managing this process. This minister of electricity is the one that we've all been speculating about over the last couple of days. We've been waiting for that cabinet reshuffle. So perhaps then once we know who they are, they will be in charge, of course, Koli, of dealing with those matters. I know I'm being a bit facetious right now, but on a serious note, though, we're yet to hear from the cabinet, especially Dr. Dlamini Zuma, on how this process will work. But definitely it will be in the hands. This disaster will be largely led by that Minister of Electricity. And we know that the President, there have been several changes happening in terms of MPs resigning and MPs being sworn in. And so I think a lot of that will also rest on that decision. However, we heard this week from Vincent Magwenya, the presidential spokesperson, saying that the work of the government is continuing. But, if you use the example of Dr. Joe Phaahla, the health minister, in terms of the timelines for the exemptions and the costing, so they want the costing for these exemptions to be done by the end of March, but he's anticipating only around June will those additional lines, those power lines for these exempted facilities to be up. And he's even saying that isn't even a definitive response because the scope of the work still needs to be assessed and mapped out. So yes, it's a state of disaster, but clearly, just judging from what we've heard today, already there's going to be a renewal every month after the 3 months has lapsed, which had began, of course, on the 28th of February.
Senior reporter there, Ziyanda Ngcobo, live for us in Pretoria.